is Fox 5 News Morning.
Hours away now from possibly learning the first charges revealed in the Robert Mueller investigation. Reports certainly have circulated for days now that a federal indictment will be unsealed today. Mueller is investigating possible collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. Two potential targets, former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort and former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Joining us now, former federal prosecutor Seth, who is now with the Government Investigations and White Collar Practice at Dickinson Wright Law Firm. Seth, thanks for being back with us today. What may we hear first when things are unsealed today?
So what will first happen is the indictment would be announced, and there may be the case that someone is actually processed, brought before a judge, and read the charges.
The two names that we just mentioned, are those the two leading candidates at this time, or is this all speculation at this point?
Well, it is speculation. The only people that truly know are Bob Mueller and his team, but those are the two names we've heard most, Paul Manafort, Michael Flynn.
So what would it mean if one, if not both of those names are announced today then, as far as what happens next? Because obviously for them, there will be a process depending on what it is that is in the details, but the investigation continues as well, right?
Well, that's right. I think this would be the first in a series of charges. I think Mr. Manafort and Mr. Flynn would obviously face a judge and ultimately potentially a jury. But Bob Mueller's investigation is going to be ongoing. I think we're going to be looking at additional charges down the line to one or more other individuals associated with the Trump campaign.
So what is the next step then for Bob Mueller, or is this still all part of the original plan? Because it seems like this, trying to chart this course seems nearly impossible with all the different branches coming off of it.
Yeah, well, it's a complex investigation. I think what Bob Mueller's primary focus right now is to try to flip people, to try to get the people he charges early on to roll up, the little fish going after the big fish, to try to get them to turn state's evidence, to go as high as he can. And ultimately, at the top of this pyramid is the president himself.
And what's he looking for in this and trying to get everybody to flip? What's the holy grail for him in this investigation?
So one thing that's very difficult about a conspiracy is unless you have someone on a wire or emails or documents as to specific communications, you really need the people on the inside of that conspiracy to tell you how it operated, who did what, where, and how. And the best way to do that is to get people to cooperate that we're part of that conspiracy by having them to plead guilty to certain crimes in exchange, of course, for a more lenient sentence for themselves.
When this investigation started, it seemed targeted in one way, and then obviously we don't know exactly what Bob Mueller is looking at. What we hear is people from the outside saying, well, maybe this will be part of it, or maybe this has to be part of it, and then it's just been diluted so much. Is the end result here still to show that Russia influenced the election, or have we tangented off so many other ways now?
Well, I think that's his primary mandate, but he does have a broad mandate. So it's anything that relates to what you just talked about or anything that arises out of that investigation. So we know that special prosecutors' investigations have gone off in many directions. One that comes to my mind readily right now is Donald Trump's taxes. Sometimes the way federal prosecutors look at crimes is, proving an obstruction case, proving tampering with a federal election can be a complex undertaking. On the other hand, if they are looking at Donald Trump's taxes and he did not claim revenue on his taxes, that can be a very straightforward charge that's very difficult to defend. I mean, historically, people like Al Capone have been taken down on tax fraud charges as opposed to, the core wrongdoing that they were primarily involved in at first.
And where are the lines blurred or drawn when it comes to the president's overreach in this process? Could he still fire Bob Mueller? Could he make immediate pardons to anyone who might be caught up in these indictments?
Technically, I think he can. I think that politically that would be very difficult in the sense that I think if he were to try to fire Bob Mueller, either by removing Rob Rosenstein, if he refused to do it, and appointing another DAG or Deputy Assistant Attorney General to engage in that kind of conduct, I think very shortly thereafter there'd be calls for impeachment and serious steps towards impeachment. So I think that is a very difficult road for him to go down.
And that dealing with the fallout from Congress then, when it comes to what the reaction might be if he did that. What about pardons?
Again, depending on how he used that pardon power and in what context. In other words, if Paul Manafort were charged, today, and then in the coming weeks or even towards a trial came about, Donald Trump were to pardon him, I think the political fallout from that could be devastating in the sense that impeachment proceedings could take place. And there are many scholars out there that say that he cannot use his pardon power in that manner. I will tell you that that's not a legal question that's been settled. Frankly.
The other thing is that you have the president and the president's supporters who are saying, look, they keep deflecting and saying, well, what about Hillary's involvement with Russia? What about Democrats' involvement with Russia? Could
that all be involved as well? Could there be indictments against people from the Democratic Party, perhaps, from dealings that led up earlier? Is that something that's being looked at as well in some of these tangents?
I feel like that's very unlikely. I think Bob Mueller's team has a mandate to look into this administration's collusions with the Russians, you know, whether there is other criminal conduct that has taken place in the world at the same time. That's very possible. I mean, prosecutors have a lot of things to look at, and this prosecutor's job, as I understand it, is to focus in on that one aspect and anything that arises from that. And I feel like, you know, reaching out to other allegations of collusion not centered on the 2016 election is really going beyond the scope of this mandate.
All right, and finally, how much information should we likely gain in an investigation like this if something is unsealed today? Would it quite simply be the name of a person, or would we have volumes and volumes of details released today?
Well, we'll have an indictment. So that will be, you know, a 10, 20, 30-page document that will lay out in pretty good detail what those charges are. If it's a conspiracy that's charged, you'll have the overt acts of that conspiracy, essentially what were the specific things that were undertaken to bring about the crime. You'll have, you know, other facts relating to that charge. So we should have a pretty good idea as it relates to those charges, whether those relate to the Russia influence in the election or something much more tangential like business transactions by Paul Manafort in 2012 or 13. We just don't know.
You didn't? Nobody from DOJ said stand by at 10:15 or anything like that?
I have not received that call yet.
Okay, all right.
I'm waiting, though.
Let us know if you do.
I will.
Thanks, Seth Waxman, for joining us. It's 7:36.